you're looking at a time machine. Actually, what you're looking at is the Wayback Machine, set to 2005, December 19th, which is just a page, just a moment in time. I really love the fact that the Wayback Machine works and could even exist. The fact that it actually has a memory of old websites, considering how big the internet is, the fact that the Wayback Machine stores all of this stuff is just astounding. So, before I got legitimate, in fact, this page is pre that legitimacy before I started advertising DSX Machina on this page. That's why, one of the reasons I picked this moment. This is kind of, it was 2007, 2008 where I started to try to become more of a series. And of course now, I do this for a living. Well, try to. But this was Serena Dawn Spaceport. Now, for those people who don't know what Serena Dawn Spaceport is, it is an extremely deep cut pull. What we're looking at here is a website that I created in 1995 or 1996. I know it says visitors since 2004. That was the last rebuild, but originally got formed in 1996, and it was a sub page off of mecha.com, which is an astoundingly unique, fantastic domain, like mecha.com. Like, I actually knew the guy who made mecha.com, but he didn't do anything with it. I assume he eventually sold it for good money, I'm hoping, to somebody. I actually don't know what mecha.com is now, but he held on to it. He was very smart to secure mecha.com back in the 90s. And he gave me website and web address for Serena Dawn Spaceport, which is where it started. The irony was the fact that because he didn't do anything with it, I was the only one sucking down his bandwidth. In fact, back then, bandwidth was very expensive, so eventually he had to let me go because I was the only person that was using his bandwidth, and I was using a lot of it. So eventually I went to a public server, and I bounced between 2 or 3 different public companies, and now I'm at Host Papa, but I went through at least 3 or 4 different companies. I was with one, I can't remember the name now. It went through a couple different names for almost 15 years. And I spent quite a bit of money. I could have probably moved to somebody, but because there was so much traffic. There were forums, which we don't have the forums here, but there was a forum, and that ran for a little bit, and then it became such a colossal pain in the butt to filter out the bots. I eventually killed it because there were a few people that were posting, but there were just too many bloody bots going in there and posting stuff, advertising stuff. I just gave up. But so that was something I did. But this was formed. I built it, I want to say, in 1994, and I built it because of one specific thing. Now, back then, I had a couple of games, homebrew games. None of them using D&D at the time, because D&D was 3.5. I hadn't embraced 3.5. 3.5 didn't exist. 3.0 didn't exist. This is the mid to late 90s. I was in love with cyberpunk, Artelzorian stuff, so I was a big fan of Fusion and a few other things. So back then, I'm not sure if there's a further back in time we could go. But yeah, there's 2021 all the way. I can go back to 1996, but I don't think there's anything back there. The largest free RPGs online, because back in that time you could do that. So in here we're looking at the original game. Though here in this format we're looking at here, I didn't separate the RPGs, because at that point that's all it was. It was just the RPGs, and then later on when we move into 2008, things change. This is fascinating. At the time, Amethyst was an actual game. It should still be on here if I click on it. It was a homebrew game. Almost everything else I did was a rebuild of older homebrew games. Yeah, this I was still building it at the time. Let's go back a page. So, so the 2 big ones I had here, I had Amethyst D20, which I was working on. Alien Fusion was the big one. Now, when I first started, it was a Pathfinder game called a GURPS game called Pathfinder. This was a sci-fi game that was heavily inspired by Chris Foss and the spacecraft books from Stuart Cowley, and I ran that for at least a year and a half, 2 years. I also had a cyberpunk game called Necropolis. It was a singular adventure, but I ran it 3 different times with 3 different groups. So that was this one here. This one was slightly inspired by Bubblegum Crisis. Wow, looking at mid-90s web design. Oh, Jesus, like 1998 when I made that page official. Artwork was pulled from various sources, but Jesus. What's funny though is that Necropolis was retooled and rebuilt and rewritten, and now it's an adventure in the new Ultramodern 5 redo book. So people think, oh, that's the original Necropolis. Yes, but it's not. There's some things we changed. The other big one, which was a Mechtan Zeta game called Conestoga, which is also being used in the new game Affinity, which at the time of this video is launching on March 30th. Hopefully this will bring up the page. Another awkward. It's like GeoCities, these old pages, but I built these myself. So this was built 1998 as well. That's when this page went live. Actually, the page I think was page I built in 1996. Yeah, and then most of these pages came after. And it uses the fusion system. Now, the Conestoga that we're seeing in Infinity has nothing to do with this Conestoga. This was this was kind of like Dune with mecha. And without the spice, which, funny thing enough, if you put mecha in Dune and take out the spice, you get BattleTech. So I was trying to make it a bit more political story, but that's Conestoga. And then we have the Pathfinder GURPS, which I didn't click on, and that one is a lot of stuff. There's a lot of stuff, but a lot of copyright infringement, unfortunately. That's what I did in the 90s. I fully admit that I did give copyright. I didn't say I own the artwork. I did give credit where credit is due. And this Pathfinder, formed up again as something called Threshold. So in Ultramodern 5, there's a module called Threshold. It's one of the two adventures. It's that one and Necropolis, and that one involves going into space hulks and going through and then dealing with the creatures. And then there's a whole bunch of stories that a GM could play. All of those were taken from this Pathfinder game. This obviously, and so these ship names, I didn't use the artwork, obviously. Once again, these are from Spacecraft books by Stuart Cowley. Some of the artwork is done by Rob Lazelle, Chris Foss, Colin Hay. I actually know these names. These are I was and still am in love with the 1970s space art, and so this was a bit of that. No, all of it is from Spacecraft. There are some other things. As a general, Chris Foss right here. This is Spacecraft, so I think that's Colin Hay. This is Spacecraft, but this is Chris Foss. This is a sketch that I made, but it's not an original sketch. This is a Spacecraft from an Aliens comic. This is from Aliens. That's back to Spacecraft. This is from Aliens again. So I pulled the Spacecraft from numerous sources. So if I scroll through very quickly, you'll see some of these names are in the Threshold module that's in Ultramodern 5. This is where it originally began. It was in a story called Pathfinder. I didn't take that name, obviously, because now Pathfinder is a big fantasy RPG. People who read this have come to me and go, hey, a second, this Pathfinder setting sounds a lot like Firefly. And you'd be right, because Firefly and this Pathfinder game have a lot in common. Both of them involve a massive expanding human empire, no aliens, and the further you get away from the core system, the lower tech it becomes. So the people out in the fringes are using very, very low tech and so forth. And that's very much. Now, I didn't go so far as to tap that Old West mentality. There was still technology, so no one was resorting to using horses. But the idea that the main characters, the players, were using various wide broad of technologies, and because older technologies was more reliable. And I've had people come and goes, this reminds me a lot of Firefly, and go, yeah, and then check the date, 1998. I beat Firefly by about 3 years. So this is not ripping off Firefly. It's actually, and I'm not saying the other way around, obviously, but it's just pure coincidence. So when I pulled Pathfinder and turned into Threshold, I took the elements that were like Firefly out and added new stuff, and I put it back in, and that created the Pathfinder that we know. Ships of the Line was a GURPS/Mechtan. I have it for both systems. This was a failed game. It never actually came to fruition. This was meant to be a kind of the idea of using ships like submarines and dealing with the crews on these ships. I actually only ran one session and it failed. It was actually a failed game. I have the only big dominant memory I have about this one was that I wrote a 30-page book about the history of Ships of the Line, the setting, the campaign book, and then my hard drive died, and I had to write the whole thing again. it really sucked. I used a lot of artwork from, oh God, I'm going to forget his name. I think he's no longer with us, but yeah, oh God, Berkey, John Berkey. I got it, John Berkey, that's his name, John Berkey, that's his artwork. I used a lot of that for Ships of the Line. And then we have Pathfinder, Amethyst, which I said didn't here, but I built the page specifically for this, which was Alien Fusion. This is the old Alien Fusion, and we're going to show the newer one when the page gets rebuilt. This is the old page before it gets rebuilt by my friend Chris Brown. So this was built, I can't remember what the day I did it. I think I started doing this in 1996, and then I finished it in 1998. This was the original one. There's a PayPal button in there, which I think made me a total of $200 over the course of 20 years. Not really. I love this GIF, by the way. I love that GIF. I don't know how I found that, but that's a cool GIF. And then I used this font that I already used a lot in that time period, and that became... it's called Alien Fusion because Alien Fusion was based off of... the Artel-Azorian system. So Artel-Azorian had a rule system called Interlock, and that Interlock, they merged it with Hero Games, and they created Fusion. And Fusion was about 80-90% of the Interlock system, but it had its own ideas. And then the Fusion system would pop up in another dozen or so games. Vodums, Bubblegum Crisis, all of the anime games that Artel-Azorian would put out would use Fusion. In fact, I think Cyberpunk version 3 also used Fusion, but I never read that one because I only know 2013, 2020. I never looked at the later Cyberpunk editions. And people don't even think about it because when they reprinted Cyberpunk recently, they reprinted 2020 because that's the one everybody knows. I don't think anyone even knows the fact that there was a third edition after 2020 because it wasn't very well. It wasn't received very well. The artwork wasn't very good, and most people forget about it, but they embraced 2020. Now, there was an Alien game based off of Cyberpunk rules, using Cyberpunk rules. I can't remember the guy's name, but that was kind of the dominant system. Right? There was no Alien RPG. There was Leading Edge, which no one played, which I own, and I bought it. I bought it way later off of eBay in order to help fill up my settings. So it has all the stuff from the Leading Edge game in Alien Fusion, but the Cyberpunk 2020 version that was popular for so long, it only used the Lee Brimacombe Wood Colonial Marines Tech Manual, and that's it. I, being a huge fan of Alien, which I'll go into in another video, I was incredibly associated with. I knew this franchise very, very well. I built the models. I owned many comics, read books, and so forth. Had the soundtracks, owned the movies, obviously. So I wanted to do an Alien RPG, and I felt I could do a better one, and there wasn't one out that I was a real thorough version of the setting. So I did this, and it was the idea is that I was going to take everything and try to recombine it into a semi-canon setting. Not saying it was going to be canon, but the idea was to take all the non-canonical stuff from Dark Horse, all the non-canonical stuff from the card game, and then try to find a way to rework it with the canon stuff so it all stayed together. Because the issue with like non-canonical stuff generally doesn't conflict with canonical stuff. They just decide it's non-canonical so they can ignore it. But in Aliens, the non-canonical stuff literally conflict with the canonical elements. Like Ripley was alive after the events of Aliens and didn't die in Alien 3 in the original canonical timeline because Dark Horse started making their comics after Aliens, not thinking what was going to happen, which is funny because they knew there was going to be another film that was going to break their continuity. But so I took that Dark Horse stuff, I took everything I had and I combined it together, and this was the first edition. We'll see there is one here, there's a supplement for Alien Resurrection, the Predator, the Jockey Race, and one I was going to do called Alien Cold War, which was something else. At this point, the Alien vs. Predator films hadn't been made. They hadn't come out yet, so I don't have anything based off of them. But I do have Alien Resurrection, which was that, and then the Predators and the Jockey Race. The Jockey Race, I still like my interpretation of the jockeys more than the engineers, but that's just me. My interpretation of them had them as being alien, not humanoid creatures. I like their use of biomechanical technology, and I like the idea of the alien being their version of a synthetic, a bioweapon that they employed. Unlike Dark Horse, which actually promoted the idea that they were an evolved creature on a planet, which never made a lot of sense. I like the idea of them being a bioweapon developed by these ancient aliens, more so than them being the result of a synthetics experiments from 20 years before the Alien movie begins, which I don't think is a good idea, but people know my thoughts on that. This used the Fusion system, which was free. This was the first attempt at a OGL. You couldn't publish a game using Fusion, but you could still use the systems, the rules for free on your homebrew rules. This was before 3.0 came up with the OGL and said, yeah, go ahead, publish using our system, we don't care. That idea was completely alien in the mid-90s. So Alien Fusion was popular. It was so popular, I think it actually gets a reference, at least was a reference in one of the Wikipedia pages on Alien. So I'll go into in Alien in another video, just very specifically, but this was my page, and I had advice for good role-playing, which I'm actually thinking of dusting off for a video series coming up probably later in the year. And then the quote page, which was just a list of these, what my page was kind of famous for back when it was going up, which is these actual quotes from my game. Now back then there wasn't very much, because my Amethyst game didn't exist back then. So all of this is all from my pre-Amethyst days, because this went to dozens of pages. So when we go out of that and we move to, say, let's go into a later date, let's go into back to 2006, we'll see a significant shift in the page. So now we can see what this looks like. Page has gotten a lot different, and that's because now we have this new page that was built by Alejandro. It was built in 2004, and now I have the role-playing in their own database. So now you click on it, and that's where we have all the games. Except for Alien Fusion, because it was so popular, I put that in its own little thing. It's still here. I love the idea of, by the way, of every time you go on an option, it changes little GIF. That was cool. I didn't know how to do that. Someone else did it for me. But there was the Alien game, and the Alien game now, it looks different now, because the page was now built for this aspect ratio. So everything was built in this aspect ratio. But I do believe the individual pages were still from the original. But no, they were rebuilt as well. We rebuilt everything. And we have Necropolis, Ships of the Line again, Advice, Conestoga, Amethyst, which did exist. Okay, now we're in a page where the Amethyst page does exist. So this is the Amethyst from the original D20, built in 2004. It would go through a lot of retconning before it hit publication. Oddly enough, though, I still use some of these information as reference. If we do a third Amethyst book, I will be tapping this information and going off of its original idea. All this artwork, once again, is pulled from other sources, but unlike Necropolis and Pathfinder, all the artwork in Amethyst I had gotten permission to use. I went to each, and this is when I kind of got my act together, and I actually went out and I specifically asked every single artist, can I use these illustrations? I asked about 30 or 40 of them, which is the reason why the art style is somewhat inconsistent in Amethyst, in this Amethyst at least. And all but 2 said yes. Only 2 said no. One just outright said no. The other one said, almost everything I do is contract to other artists, other commissions, and they own that, not me. So you can't use my stuff because the stuff doesn't belong to me either. And that's, like I said, this is how I met a bunch of really good artists, including Nick Greenwood, and the rest is history on that one. I guess we're not pulling up those original images, which is too bad. Like that, for example, there's this armor. Do we have images popping up? Too bad. I guess we're not getting any illustrations there. That's fine. It's not a big deal. But that was Amethyst. Crypts is here, Conestoga, and then Alien Fusion now looks different, which is weird. The Alien Fusion page came up with artwork, but all that artwork's still popping up. Yeah, I go a little crazy on this. We'll go about that. That's a video in itself. The other thing, of course, about the Serena Dawn page is that this is when I had all few the forum, which I don't even want to look at right now. High Fleet Newborn, which was a narrative thing, which was about the history. That very obviously this is heavy on Giger. This is just a fluff thing talking about the history of my Tyranid army. Tyranids were the first army I played, and then my second army was a Tau army, and it was heavily inspired by the game Homeworld. So is that going to load up? Oh, eventually it will be. So I actually won an award for this lore, because I printed this whole page. I took it to a tournament, and I won for best thematic army. I guess that's all we're getting. That's too bad. And then the great game quotes are now on the front page here, and then we would add more of them. I would change this all the time, and then we have news and updates. And 2006, I think, might have actually be the last time I ever updated this page. If we move up to say really recently, more recent 2012, we'll see that Amethyst doesn't exist anymore, right? Because it takes you right to the dsxmachina.com. The irony, of course, is that it takes me to what dsxmachina.com looked like in 2012. The DS Machina still exists, but not this version. This new, because this was done off of an outline that Alejandro had made, Chris Brown, and I had bought this Adobe Flash. Is no longer being supported, but this used to be this cool little Flash menu here. I still had the archive here and had all of our games and so forth. Then eventually this got replaced with what we have now that Alejandro built. Alien Fusion still exists as well, but there's a link. The writer of Alien Fusion and Ghost in the Shell 2. Oh yeah, that's the other thing. Oh, I forgot about that. The Ghost in the Shell D20. So I ran Ghost in the Shell. I created a Ghost in the Shell game. This was also referenced on Wikipedia. That one was interesting. I'll go into details in this one because it's not really worth going into its own video. So this used a D20 system because this is now into 2000. 3.5 came out and you could use it legally. And so I created a Cyberpunk game using Ghost in the Shell D20. A good chunk of these rules that I liked, I pulled into Neurospasta. But obviously not the fluff, because that was something that's Ghost in the Shell. So once again, I did a deep dive. I did a very deep dive on that history. And some people say this is one of the most thorough sources of Ghost in the Shell lore. The problem, of course, is that some of it is original, which means it's not a good source. I would not use this site as a good source for Ghost in the Shell lore because some of it was invented, right? Like some of the cars and some of the vehicles I've listed, I make up names for them because they don't exist as right. I don't invent vehicles per se, but when I see a vehicle and there's no name to it, I'll give a name to it. Like the Botanacci tilt rotor, for example, I created the word Botanacci. I've tried to keep it thematically connected to the setting so it made sense. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff in here. Like this transport from Ghost in the Shell 2 doesn't have a name. I called it the Amadori Multipurpose Transport. So if someone calls it the Amadori in a source, I go, that's not legit. That's a name I made up. But that was the Ghost in the Shell. I ran this for a year. It was between my two Amethyst games. My first Amethyst game ended, and I wanted a break. I wanted to do something else. And so I ran a Ghost in the Shell game. It was inspired by Standalone Complex. And I ran it for a year, and it had a beginning, middle, and end. It actually had an end. The characters went off their separate ways. The game ended, and that was it. And we never returned to it. And then, so I ran it for about 26 episodes, 1 year. I don't have the adventure here. I just have your setting, but I don't have my own adventure here. I thought it was a pretty good story, actually. It dealt with... the villain was a hacker with multiple personalities, but because he had a cyber brain, those multiple personalities could manifest in separate fashions on the net. So the characters thought they were dealing with this terrorist organization of a dozen different people, and it turns out it was just one guy with multiple personalities. Very much a Ghost in the Shell idea, the idea of a person having multiple ghosts inhabiting the one body because they have multiple personalities. So that was the Ghost in the Shell. One thing you notice here, which wasn't in an earlier page. If we go to, say, 2000 to that 2007 page we started off with, you'll see another thing that ended up not happening. And go back to the role-playing database, and we'll see, is it still here? The Matrix. I was going to design a Matrix D20 game. There was actually supposed to be an image there. But yeah, I was going to design the Matrix D20 coming soon. That was going to be my next homebrew project. I had went through the Matrix big box set. I had gotten every bit of artwork. I was going to run an entire adventure that was set after the events of the third film. and that was going to be this Matrix D20. It was going to be heavy about kung fu and focusing, power, and so forth, and run a storyline that was a non-canonical story that takes events after. Now, this is before the Matrix Online happened. Matrix Online had their own direction; they went their own canonical direction, and I was thinking of pulling that in. Eventually, though, despite having pulled all of this stuff, it then ended up not happening because I decided to do Amethyst, which is the only original setting among here. Because the Necropolis and Ships of the Line, there's not much to them. Amethyst had a lot of depth because we were running that game. So eventually I abandoned the idea and just stuck with Amethyst from that point on. But yeah, though, that was actually the only one that I was going to do. But that I had publicly admitted I was going to do, but it wasn't the only one because I was also going to do a Futurama game. I actually was going to have a Futurama game, and its shtick was that it had like 90 races you could choose. Like he's like, we're going to add a few more classes, right? But most of the classes were pulling the tech classes from Amethyst anyway, and here's 90 new races, and I was just going to have just crazy variety in races, and that nothing ever happened to that. Oddly enough, thinking about it, thinking that would be crazy. It would make sense because I know the Futurama guys, creator of Futurama, are big D&D guys. Go up to them, can I do actual Futurama 5e game? And what's the shtick? I don't know. The shtick's going to have about 90 races. It's going to be like half the book is just going to be race. Like, here are all the races in Futurama you can use. It would be neat. I think I would have fun with that one. But yeah, so this is the history of my page because I don't think there was a lot later that came about of this. Oh, because it stayed this way. Because now we're in 2007. We can go to 2017 even, and it still stayed up. I said 2008 was the last time I updated it. And I pulled the forum off, and then I just put the link to Deus Ex Machina, which at that point, now it's changed, because it used to be part of Serena Dawn, and now it doesn't exist anymore, because Serena Dawn doesn't exist. Because in, I want to say 2019, or it could be early 2020, we had forgotten to renew the domain name in time, because I was kind of focusing on other things, and I kind of forgot to tell my web designer, oh, by the way, you got to do this. And then we let it lapse. And before we knew it, it got purchased by somebody else who now wants to raffle it off for $5,000. I'm like, you know what? I'm not getting any money. This doesn't exist. And once again, you can find the old Serena Dawn Spaceport on Wayback, just as I am. You can find it. It's not dead. It still exists. I still have all these files on my computer, so it still exists in my mind, and it ran for 20 years. So yeah, it's unfortunate that the site went down, but we're talking about that deep cut at the beginning of this video. Serena Dawn Spaceport was named after a spaceport in Star Frontiers. Star Frontiers, the original blue box Star Frontiers, there was an adventure included, and the space station in there was called Serena Dawn Spaceport. So that's where this name came from, was Serena Dawn Spaceport. And that's my Serena Dawn. I ran it for 20-some years before I decided to go legit. It was a fun thing. It's still dated because we never bothered to update it, and it was still getting hits until recently because of the Alien Fusion. Now, the funny thing enough is I would be surprised if I had gotten the cease and desist from the new publishers of that because of the new game. I probably would have gotten a cease and desist in the same way where all the video game adaptations of Alien, Alien Doom, Alien Quake, they all got cease and desists when the AVP game started getting developed. But there you go. This is a little look back, the way back to my original Serena Dawn Spaceport. This is how I began. If everyone says, hey, what's your secret? Well, how do I get to being my own publisher of role-playing games? How can I become a guy that, like me, who can write role-playing games for a living, or at least for a short time, which is where I'm doing it now. I've been doing it on my own for 2 years. I can say, easy. Develop a homebrew page and run it without profit for 20 years and develop a small enough fan following that will follow you into being a legitimate story. And even then, falter and fumble through failed game after failed game, and then continue to develop that audience for another 10 years before you go legit, you know. But oddly enough, the roots of Ultramodern, the roots of the current Amethyst, they still come back from here, right? Ghost in the Shell became a Neurospasta, you know. Elements from Pathfinder turned into a Threshold in Ultramodern 5. Necropolis turned into Necropolis, the new version of Necropolis in Ultramodern 5. Amethyst still exists, and the rules off of Amethyst turned into Ultramodern 4 and then Ultramodern 5, and that's how things happen. But it started with this original page that came out in 1996. And I made a joke that this site was almost as old as Penny Arcade, because I was talking with Jerry Hawkins about this. But yeah, that's it. That is Serena Dawn Spaceport, my way back look to Serena Dawn Spaceport. So anyway, have a great evening, guys and gals. And this has been Chris from Deus Ex Machina.